Have you ever felt like you're always struggling just to survive while the life you really want seems further and further away? Have you ever felt like, no matter how hard you try, money slips through your fingers like water? What if I told you that all of this can start to change based on what you think and feel? This is Isabella's story. She was living on a shoestring budget, her heart was weary, and a question echoed deep within her soul: is this the life I'll have forever? But everything began to change the moment she decided to try something different. She chose to trust her mind, her energy, and the invisible force that connects everything. And what happened from there, you need to hear it until the end. By the way, before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you hearing this story from? And take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and give a like if this message touched you, because what comes next could change the way you view your own financial life. Isabella always knew the value of every penny. Living in a small two-room apartment, the sound of bills hitting the door seemed more constant than her own footsteps. Her salary barely covered the basics, and grocery shopping was done with a list in hand and a heavy heart. Every month she made nearly impossible calculations to stretch what little she had. She lived on a tightrope between it can wait and there's no way to put it off any longer. She didn't think she was lazy or incapable. On the contrary, she worked hard, put in overtime when she could, and yet she never seemed to get anywhere. It was like rowing a leaky boat. The harder she tried, the more water came in. The feeling of always starting from scratch clung to her like a shadow. And it wasn't just money, it was the weight of never having a break, never having peace. The days repeated themselves, and she began to think this was, in fact, real life. Sometimes walking down the street, she'd see shop windows with expensive clothes, crowded restaurants, travel ads on billboards, and she'd find herself wondering, will I ever have that? But this question wasn't asked with hope. It was more like a silent outburst. Deep down, she believed it wasn't for her, that the world of abundance belonged to other people. The most she could dream of was simple stability, something like paying the bills without fear, and maybe a weekend at the beach. Worst of all, she thought she was alone in this. Her friends seemed to be doing better, buying cars, making plans. Isabella, for her part, hid her bills under her stack of notebooks and disguised her fatigue with a smile. At night, before bed, she would scroll through videos about wealth on her phone, but soon turn it off like someone staring at a shooting star too beautiful to believe. Still, something inside her insisted on keeping her eyes open, and it was there, in that silence between an overdue bill and a stale coffee, that a seed began to sprout. She didn't know its name yet, but it was like a spark. What if there was a different way to live? What if the problem wasn't just the salary, but something deeper? Isabella didn't know, but that doubt was the beginning of everything. Since she was little, Isabella heard phrases like, "Money doesn't grow on trees," or "Those born poor die poor." These words, spoken without malice, took root deep within her, as if they were absolute truths. She grew up believing that life was made of hard work, suffering, and accepting the little with forced gratitude. Even when she had a good idea or felt like trying something different, an inner voice whispered, "This isn't for you." And over time, she stopped trying. The curious thing is that Isabella didn't realize she was trapped in this invisible cycle. It was as if she wore dark lenses over her eyes, seeing the world through scarcity. Every opportunity that presented itself, she sabotaged, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of habit. She thought she wasn't good enough, that success was the luck of the rich or the overly talented. And so she continued to settle for little, as if playing a game she already knew she would lose. She once received a freelance job offer that paid twice what she was earning in a week. But when it came time to respond, she froze. She made 1,000 excuses for herself. That she wouldn't have time, that she wouldn't know how to do it, that it was too much responsibility. Deep down, it was old fear disguised as logic. It was her mind, trying to protect her from what she unconsciously believed she didn't deserve. These beliefs didn't scream, they whispered. They were there in the way she shrugged off compliments, the way she flinched when talking about money, the way she avoided the conversation when someone mentioned big dreams. It wasn't laziness, it was conditioning. Isabella was trapped in an invisible cage, its bars made of everything she'd heard and believed about herself. But she didn't yet know she could exchange this dark lens for a new outlook on life. It was on one of those cloudy days that, unintentionally, she stumbled upon something unusual. A video, the kind you can't even remember how you got there, talked about limiting beliefs and the power of the mind. At first, Isabella laughed, but something about it tugged at her. Did it make sense? Was she living in a story that wasn't even hers? On that hot Tuesday, Isabella was exhausted. She'd woken before sunrise to try to settle yet another debt at the bank. The maxed-out credit card, the overdue electricity bill. Returning home, she sat on a park bench with a bag of bread in her hand and a lump in her throat. The phone rang. It was the clinic announcing that the dog's exam would need to be paid in full. At that moment, she couldn't take it anymore and cried right there in the middle of the street. The tears weren't just about lack of money. They were about everything that had been building up: the frustration of not being able to change, the feeling of helplessness, the fear that life would always be like this. She cried for all the times she pretended to be okay, for every yes she said when she wanted to scream no. She cried because it was easier to break down than to stay strong. And in that cry, something inside her broke, and at the same time began to open. Back in the apartment, her eyes still swollen, Isabella sat on the couch and stared at the ceiling. "Enough," she said softly. It wasn't a cry of rage, it was a sigh of resolve. It was as if she'd grown tired of trying to weather the storm with a leaky umbrella. Something inside her whispered, "Either you change your mind, or your life will never change." And for the first time she listened carefully to that whisper. It was then that she remembered that old video about the law of attraction, which she had ignored weeks before. She decided to look again, unsure of what she expected to find. But there was a new hope mixed with the pain. She no longer wanted to survive, she wanted to live. And if that were truly possible, why not try? After all, she couldn't stay worse off than she was. With a notebook in hand and her heart still trembling, Isabella took the first step. She decided she would try it for 30 days, no charges, no guarantees, just to see what would happen. It wasn't about money anymore, it was about finding herself again. Little did she know that this simple choice would become the key to her entire story. The next day, while drinking coffee with the same old stale bread, Isabella remembered a colleague from her old job, Julia. They had never been close, but that woman had a different light, a calm that seemed to come from another place. Julia had once mentioned that she used the law of attraction to attract opportunities and balance. Isabella smiled politely at the time, but didn't take it seriously. Now it resonated differently. It was as if the universe was trying to show her something she was only now ready to see. Digging through her phone's old files, she found a conversation with Julia. Her heart racing, she wrote an unassuming message. "Do you still practice those energy and positive mindset things?" She wasn't expecting a quick response, but within minutes the notification appeared. Julia responded kindly, pointing out a specific video and suggesting starting with something simple: daily gratitude. Isabella, not quite understanding, thanked her and clicked on the link. The video featured a woman who spoke softly, as if speaking soul to soul. She explained that what you feel vibrates higher than what you say, and that by changing your internal frequency, your external reality begins to respond. Isabella was mesmerized. It wasn't magic, it was mentality. And that, yes, made sense. That same day, she took a sheet of paper and wrote, "For 30 days, I will try to see life with eyes of gratitude. Even if nothing changes on the outside, I will change on the inside." Simple, direct, no promising the impossible, just opening herself up to something different. And deep down, something had already changed. She was saying yes to herself. It was as if an invisible door had opened. Isabella didn't yet know what lay on the other side, but she felt a new desire to cross. What if there really was a greater force waiting only for her signal to act? That night, with the room silent and the fan humming monotonously, Isabella took a blank sheet of paper and wrote, Day 1. She didn't know exactly what she was doing, but she felt she had to give it a serious try. She decided that for 30 days she would practice gratitude, visualize a more prosperous life, and above all, pay attention to what she thought about. It didn't matter if it seemed silly or fanciful. It was a pact with herself, a silent act of faith. Early in the morning, she began her new ritual. Before checking her phone, she took a deep breath and thought of 3 things she was grateful for: the roof over her head, the hot coffee, and the fact that she was alive. She wrote these down in her notebook, slowly, trying to truly feel them. Then she closed her eyes for 2 minutes and imagined herself at peace, with her bills paid, smiling lightly. It was simple, but she felt a different kind of peace. As if for a few seconds, her mind was breathing. Throughout the day, when anxiety struck or doubt loomed, Isabella would silently repeat, I choose to trust. It was almost like an anchor in the midst of chaos. She realized that by changing the way she looked, the sensations in her body also changed, and even without seeing immediate results, she felt something adjusting, as if she were tuning her instruments before starting to play a new melody. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing. She kept this experience a sacred secret, hers alone. She knew that on the outside, her life still looked the same, but on the inside, a quiet revolution was taking place. For the first time in a long time, she felt she had a choice, that perhaps she wasn't a prisoner of her circumstances, but rather a creator of a new reality. And it was in this frequency of silence, faith, and small steps that Isabella began the most important experiment of her life. The world was still the same outside, but inside her, there was a spark burning. And the universe, they say, listens better when we start listening to ourselves. In the early days of the challenge, Isabella began to notice something curious. Her mind was like a radio turned up to full volume, repeating phrases she didn't even remember choosing. You won't make it, money disappears quickly, this isn't for you. It was an old echo, coming from her childhood, from school, from her neighbors, from her family. And there, between one gratitude note and another, she began to realize this wasn't her real voice. It was the voice of fear, dressed up as logic. One morning, sitting at the table with a cup of lukewarm coffee, Isabella picked up her notebook and wrote a new sentence. I can create a different reality. She stared at it for a few seconds, as if tasting a new fruit. She repeated it quietly, again, once more. It stirred her, as if she were trying to teach her heart to hear something the world had never told her. Little by little, she developed the habit of replacing heavy thoughts with empowering phrases. When she thought, I don't have any money, she'd replace it with, I'm building my financial freedom. When she thought, this never works, she'd counter with, I'm learning to trust the process. It seemed silly at first, but it worked like an antidote. It was like wiping a cloudy mirror to see who she really was. She began to realize she'd spent years telling herself a story of scarcity, and now, chapter she was rewriting that narrative. A new version of Isabella was being born, lighter, more aware, more open to what's possible. And even though nothing had changed on the outside, she already felt less like a prisoner and more like an author. This small internal revolution brought a new clarity. The world changes when we change the way we tell ourselves. Isabella finally understood that external reality was just a reflection of the script she'd been repeating internally, and decided to change her line. Even before her alarm clock rang, Isabella began waking with purpose. She no longer jumped out of bed late and on autopilot. Now the first minutes of the day were sacred. She sat on the edge of the bed, put her feet on the floor, and took 3 deep breaths, just to remember she was alive. She closed her eyes for a moment and gave thanks for the bed, for the roof, for the coffee that would come. It wasn't much, but it was hers. With the notebook on her lap, she wrote down 3 things she was grateful for, and made a point of varying them every day. Sometimes it was the sun shining through the window, other times the courage to have started something new. Then she wrote 5 affirmative sentences, all in the present tense, as if they were already real. I am prosperous. I am deserving. I receive easily. She repeated these sentences like someone planting seeds in a secret garden. Afterward, he would close his eyes and visualize. He saw himself opening an email with good news, transferring money with ease, feeling relief in his body as he looked at his bank balance. He tried to truly feel it, not just imagine it. His heart beat calmer, as if he were already there. For a few minutes, his inner reality was stronger than any external bulletin. The most beautiful thing was that it became a moment just for her. It wasn't an obligation, it was a meeting, and the more she repeated it, the more she realized how those small habits began to shape her day. Things seemed to flow with less weight, as if the world responded to her new state of mind. And even in difficult times, she reacted differently, with more clarity, more balance. This new ritual became her foundation. It was like sharpening the blade before cutting the wood. And there, in that silence filled with intention, Isabella began to feel herself becoming someone different. Someone who didn't wait for the world to change before changing from within. Isabella discovered that visualizing wasn't just imagining, it was feeling. So when she closed her eyes each morning, she didn't just see a better life. She lived it inside her mind. She imagined herself walking through a brightly lit apartment, feeling the cool floor beneath her feet, the scent of fresh coffee in the air. That wonderful feeling of peace came over her, as if her heart had room to breathe. And that was real enough to warm her chest. In another visualization, she saw herself sitting at her computer, smiling as she opened her bank account. The number was exact. She had written it down on paper, memorized it. She felt the lightness in her shoulders, the sparkle in her eyes. She even heard the ping of the payment notification coming in. Her body reacted as if she were actually experiencing it, with goosebumps on her arms and a sweet lump in her throat. One day she visualized paying her bills with ease, giving thanks for each paid bill as if it were a trophy. She felt the touch of the paper, saw her finger clicking confirm payment, heard the sound of relieved breathing. Everything was constructed in detail, texture, color, smell, sound, and the more she practiced, the stronger her inner world became. The curious thing is that these images began to bring about real changes. She walked the streets more erect, more confident, as if she knew where she was going. She began to act like the version of herself who had already achieved things, and the world seemed to notice. It was as if reality was saying, "Oh, so this is how you want to live? Then take a piece of that." And so, with her eyes closed and her heart open, Isabella discovered that the mind is a rehearsal for what's to come. The more she experienced the scene internally, the more she felt the universe putting the pieces together externally. One day, while tidying a drawer, Isabella found a box full of old magazines. That's when she had an idea to create a vision board, a space where she could see her dreams with her eyes open. She grabbed scissors, glue, and construction paper and threw herself into the game like a child making collages. She cut out images with joy: a bright house, a safe with money, a new laptop, the sea crashing against the rocks. And as she assembled them, something inside her aligned. The painting was simple yet powerful. Each image held meaning. Each word held a piece of what she wanted to experience. Above it, she wrote, "I am worthy." She stuck it right in the center of her bedroom wall, where her eyes fell first thing in the morning. It wasn't just decoration. It was a daily reminder of the path she had chosen to walk. And that path began within her. Every time she felt her energy drop, she would sit in front of the painting for a few minutes and observe every detail. She remembered why she was doing this. She reconnected with that vision of the future. But now, as something present, it was like visiting an advanced version of herself, just to remember that all of this already existed. It just hadn't materialized yet. It replenished her faith. And the most interesting thing, some images began to become reality. First, it was the laptop, which came as part of an incredible promotion. Then, a new client she'd always dreamed of working with. Small fragments of her dream board were emerging into the real world. And Isabella wasn't so surprised anymore. She knew she was simply reaping what she'd already sown in the invisible. With a calmer heart and a focused mind, she continued to look at the board every day, not with anxiety but with affection, because now she understood that visualizing wasn't about waiting idly by. It was about internally preparing for what was already coming. One random Saturday, while leafing through her gratitude notebook, Isabella had a moment. Something inside her said, "Update your portfolio." It wasn't a forced idea, nor a demand. It was as if intuition had whispered softly in her ear. She got out of bed, opened her notebook, and spent hours organizing her work, choosing words carefully without rushing. She wasn't rushing, she was simply responding to her feelings, and for the first time, it felt light. After that, she checked LinkedIn, a network she rarely used. She saw some profiles, reconnected with old contacts, and decided to send a few messages. But it wasn't the same old "Hi, I need a job." She changed her tone. She wrote, offering solutions with empathy, sharing what she knew how to do and how she could help. It was as if she'd flipped the switch. She stopped asking for value and started delivering it. She didn't expect an immediate response. She wasn't in a hurry, nor was she anxious, just trust. It was like planting seeds in fertile soil, knowing the right time would come. Isabella understood that acting inspired was different from acting desperately. The movement was the same, but the energy behind it, completely different. And that energy changed everything. In the days that followed, she continued her routine, doing what she could with what she had. But inside her, something was different. There was no longer that feeling of suffocation or lack. She did her part and left the rest to the universe. Her confidence was so strong that even her face seemed more serene, more open, as if to say, "I know it will work out." And indeed, something began to move, as if the universe were responding to this new rhythm, and it was just the beginning of what was to come. 3 days after sending those messages, Isabella was washing the dishes when she heard the notification sound on her phone. She quickly dried her hands and saw the name of a former boss flashing on the screen. "Hey, I saw your updated profile. I have a quick project here. Want to take it on?" Her heart skipped a beat. It was exactly the kind of job she'd envisioned. Fast, well paid, and best of all, paid up front. She sat on the couch with her phone in hand, still in disbelief. It wasn't a great opportunity to turn her life upside down, but it was a sign that something was happening. It felt like confirmation. It was as if the universe was saying, "See, keep going." Isabella smiled to herself, her eyes welling up. It was just a job. But for her, it was an answer. She accepted the job with gratitude, did everything with care, and put her heart into what she delivered. And soon after finishing, she received praise from the client and an unexpected referral. She was no longer chasing after it, she was being called. The vibration had shifted, and the world responded with the same frequency. What once seemed impossible now came naturally. That night, as she wrote in her notebook, Isabella wasn't just grateful for the money. She was grateful for the confirmation, the synchronicity, the certainty that she was on the right path. This further rekindled her faith in the invisible. It was no longer just a belief, it was a lived experience. And there, sitting in the dim light of the lamp, she closed her eyes and said softly, "If this is the beginning, I can't wait for what comes next." It seemed like everything was falling into place until the test came. A client's payment was late without warning, and that same day, the rent increased. Isabella felt the old tightness in her chest, that heat that rises from the stomach when the bill doesn't add up. Her first reaction was automatic. I knew it was too good to last, but this time something inside her refused to fall into the same old rut. She took a deep breath and said softly, "Calm down, you're not in the same place anymore." It was one of those days when the mind tries to sabotage everything. Thoughts of failure, doubt, fear, they all surfaced, but Isabella already had tools. Instead of drowning in them, she went for a walk, listening to a positive audiobook, the kind that calms and rekindles faith. She repeated her affirmations out loud, even with her heart pounding. And little by little, she regained her bearings, as if she were learning to dance with life, even when the music changes rhythm. That night, instead of despairing, she wrote in her notebook, "This is also part of the process." It wasn't denial, it was a choice of focus. She didn't ignore her problems, but she refused to treat them as a sentence. For the first time, she was facing the storm standing tall, umbrella firmly in hand, and that alone was a huge victory. The next morning, something curious happened. She received a message offering a smaller job, but with immediate payment. The amount covered exactly the gap that had appeared. Coincidence? Perhaps, but for Isabella, it was another sign that trust was worth it. That even when the situation changed, she could choose not to change along with it. This episode didn't just test her faith, it strengthened it, as if life was saying, "Did you really learn, or were you just repeating yourself?" And Isabella, with courage and vulnerability, responded with action. After that scare was resolved, Isabella had a simple but powerful idea. She grabbed a new notebook and wrote on the cover, "Evidence of what's working." It was a space dedicated to recording small victories, even those no one else would notice. A discount at the grocery store, a compliment from a client, a good idea in the shower. Everything went there, like collecting shiny pebbles along the way. Each entry was proof that the transformation was happening. This new habit became part of her ritual. At the end of the day, even if everything had been busy or difficult, she would stop for 5 minutes and look for something positive. It wasn't forcing gratitude, it was training her gaze. And the more she looked, the more she found. It was like tuning into a new radio station. The clearer the frequency, the clearer the sound of prosperity. The most beautiful thing was realizing how this affected the way she saw herself. Isabella began to feel more confident, more deserving, more capable. As she reread the pages, she saw a new story being written. She was no longer the woman who merely survived. She was the woman who transformed, who reacted with emotional intelligence, who chose what to nourish within herself. This evidence diary became her amulet. On difficult days, just lick through a few pages was enough to remind herself of who she was becoming. It wasn't about ignoring her problems. It was about choosing the lens through which she viewed life. And this new lens showed her a scenario where she was the protagonist, not the victim. It was then that Isabella understood. The mind needs proof to change, and she herself could be the one to provide that proof. With each written page, she reprogrammed a piece of the past and made room for an even greater future. With a clearer mind and more aligned energy, Isabella realized she needed to manage money differently. It wasn't enough to just attract it. She needed to organize what she received. She created 3 mental pots that became a rule. One for debts, one for emergencies, and another for investing in what made sense. Every amount that came in, no matter how small, was shared consciously. For the first time, money seemed to respect her in return. It wasn't a complicated spreadsheet, nor an advanced course. It was the basics, done with intention. Even the loose change had a purpose. And this created a sense of control, of calm responsibility. She now understood that the universe responds to clarity. When you show you know how to manage the little, the much begins to come closer. This new organization also helped her emotionally. Before, everything was a giant mess of debt, fear, and confusion. Now, she saw things more clearly. She knew what she could spend, what she needed to save, and how to balance it. It was as if money had stopped being a villain and started being a partner, a flow that came and went without panic. Furthermore, she began consuming simple content about finance, but with a spiritual perspective. She didn't want to get rich for ego, but for expansion. She understood that prosperity was about having the resources to live freely and help others. The more she managed her money with ease, the more it seemed to want to stay. And it was during this phase that Isabella learned something valuable. Attracting is just the beginning. Retaining, multiplying, and directing are also part of the journey. And now she was ready for all of this. One Sunday night, while browsing an online group about creativity, Isabella saw an invitation to a live stream with professionals in her field. On impulse, or perhaps intuition, she clicked the link and decided to participate. She sat with her tea in hand, notebook by her side, and a curious heart. During the broadcast, something in her clicked. It wasn't just about learning, it was about connecting. And that's exactly what happened. In the chat, she asked questions, responded to comments, and chatted with two people who were also looking to grow. Eventually, one of them contacted her privately, praised her ideas, and suggested exchanging contact information. Isabella agreed. Without realizing it, she had taken another important step. She was allowing herself to be seen. And this genuine and unhurried exchange was the beginning of something new. Days later, one of these new connections shared a temporary opening for a medium-sized project. "I thought of you right away," she wrote. Isabella, who would have previously hesitated or felt she wasn't good enough, this time responded confidently. She presented her portfolio, spoke clearly, and was called. Everything flowed as if it had already been written. And perhaps it had. These new relationships became part of her routine. People who were aligned, who spoke of the future, of purpose, of projects with heart. These weren't contacts of interest. They were meetings of intention. And Isabella understood that when you change internally, even the people you attract change. The world begins to reflect who you become. It was in this vibration of connection and expansion that Isabella began to see her work differently. Now she no longer walked alone. She was surrounded by people who also believed in the invisible and built the visible from that. It was an ordinary afternoon when the email arrived. The subject line read, "Monthly contract proposal." Isabella almost thought it was a mistake. She read it, reread it, and only then did she understand. One of her recent contacts had put her forward for a medium-term project with a fixed monthly payment. Something she'd always wanted, but which seemed so far away. Her heart raced. For the first time, stability was knocking on her door, and she was ready for it. When it came time to negotiate, Isabella realized how much she had changed. Before, she would have accepted any price just for fear of losing the opportunity. But now she knew her worth. She spoke clearly, explained her differentiators, and suggested a fair price, and she heard, from the other side, a respectful yes. This wasn't just about money, it was about identity. She behaved like someone prosperous, because in fact, she was becoming one. With the contract signed, something shifted in his body. It was as if a cement backpack had been lifted from his back. The peace he felt in that moment was indescribable. Only felt. He made some coffee, looked out the window, and smiled with his eyes. It wasn't euphoria. It was present. It was the certainty that everything he'd been practicing had finally blossomed. That week, she calmly paid bills, planned the following month, and bought herself a gift, not because she needed it, but because she deserved it. Abundance was no longer a distant idea. Now it was routine, and the best part, it had arrived without rushing, without desperation, without selling herself for crumbs. This turning point was more than a contract. It was a mirror showing Isabella who she always had the potential to be. With her new workflow and financial security beginning to take shape, Isabella began to notice small internal changes. She no longer woke up dreading bills or Monday. Now she arose with curiosity. What can I create today? Her mind shifted from problem to purpose. The weight on her shoulders gave way to a lightness she hadn't even known was possible. The affirmations that once seemed like just pretty words now rang like truth. I am prosperous, she said, and she felt it in her body, in her posture, in the tone of her voice. It was no longer a rehearsal, it was a reflex. Even the way she dressed changed. Light clothes, an easy smile, a sparkle in her eyes. Isabella began to choose more consciously where she put her energy. Because now, everything had a reason. Her conversations with friends also changed. Before, she'd talk about difficulties, bills and troubles. Now she talked about plans, courses she wanted to take, trips she was planning. It wasn't arrogance. It was expansion. She knew what rock bottom was, so she valued each step she took. Her energy inspired everyone around her. It was impossible not to notice. Even in difficult times, because yes, they still came, Isabella reacted differently. She no longer despaired. She breathed, refocused, and remembered, I am bigger than this. She knew that prosperity was not the absence of problems, but the presence of internal resources to face them. And now she had that in abundance. At this new internal level, Isabella began to live no longer for survival, but for creation. And this made everything, absolutely everything, take on new meaning. After her fixed contract, Isabella's life began to fall into place like well-placed dominoes. She paid off her last debt with a slight smile, and soon after, opened her long-awaited emergency savings account. What had previously seemed unattainable now fell into place naturally. She went to the computer store and, without a second thought, bought the new laptop outright, a silent symbol of all she had achieved. With her new computer, she set up her own little workspace at home. Natural light streamed in through the window, a plant in the corner, colorful post-it notes, with positive affirmations stuck to the wall. It was more than a physical space, it was an altar of new beginnings. The space reflected her new energy. Every detail, every choice was made with intention. Now she didn't just dream, she executed. Opportunities began to appear more frequently. A referral here, a satisfied client there, an unexpected invitation elsewhere. It was as if everything was falling into place effortlessly. Isabella understood that, by keeping her mind clear and her heart grateful, she became a natural magnet for possibilities. Life reciprocated her new vibrancy with generosity. Even the little things changed. The way she shopped, the way she talked to her family, her calm in the face of unexpected events. That old version of herself, who lived on autopilot, now gave way to a woman who was present, connected, alive. And all of this didn't happen all at once. It was the result of each conscious choice, of each morning she decided to believe. And in this light, growing flow, Isabella barely realized how far she had come. What had once been a struggle was now a flow. And this flow only grew. One afternoon, Isabella received a message that made her smile with surprise. It was from an international company, saying they had found an old post of hers and loved the way she communicated. Would you be interested in collaborating with us? The old Isabella would have doubted it, but the new Isabella just took a deep breath, felt butterflies in her stomach, and replied, yes, definitely. It was one of those moments that feel like a dream, but were merely a reflection of what had been thrumming for a long time. The project was bigger than anything she had ever done. It involved new languages, new challenges, new values, and yet she felt prepared, not out of arrogance, but out of awareness. She knew that every step she had taken, every gratitude practice, every visualization, every choice had led her to this point. It was as if the universe were saying, now it's time to expand even further. And she said yes with all her heart. The most beautiful thing is that she didn't just change financially, she changed emotionally, spiritually, energetically. The Isabella who saw herself as someone struggling to survive was now a woman who created with intention, served with purpose, and received with ease. And all this without needing to shout it to the world. Her vibration just had to reach first. People felt it. The results came. That same day as she finished work, she looked out the window at the sky and smiled to herself. She remembered the woman who had cried on the park bench months earlier and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." Because it was that pain, that rock bottom, that pushed her deep within herself. And there she found everything she needed to blossom. But little did she know that this was just the beginning of a new story. Looking back, Isabella understood that it wasn't money that changed her life. It was the way she came to see herself. The real turning point happened in the invisible, in her mind, in her heart, in small daily choices. The law of attraction wasn't a magic wand. It was the path that taught her to vibrate differently, act with purpose, and trust even without seeing. She didn't wait for everything to be perfect. She started with what she had, where she was. Isabella realized that life responds precisely to the energy we emit. When she complained, everything felt heavy. When she was grateful, everything flowed. She learned that abundance isn't about having a lot, but about feeling that what you have is enough, and from that, creating more. Today, she knows the universe doesn't reward blind effort, but rather aligned frequency, and it all begins within. Her silent example became an inspiration to others. Friends began asking what she was doing, and she simply smiled. "I've changed my vibration." She didn't need to convince anyone. Her life spoke for itself. Prosperity became the consequence of a new mindset, and this mindset is available to anyone willing to look within and rewrite their own story. Isabella understood that the secret isn't outside, it's in the way you relate to life. And from this place of clarity, everything transforms. Opportunities appear, doors open, ideas flow. But none of this happens if you keep telling yourself the same old story of scarcity. The power is, and always has been, in your hands. And maybe whoever is listening to this story now feels like it could be theirs too. Isabella's journey reminds us of something we sometimes forget. Outer life begins within a vibration. It was when she stopped fighting the world and began aligning with it that everything changed. It wasn't overnight, it wasn't magic, but it was real. The truth is, we all have this power to turn the key when we decide to change from within. Maybe you're exactly where Isabella was months ago, tired, overwhelmed, thinking life is just about surviving. But let me tell you something, there's a different path, and it starts with you. You just need to take the first step, like she did, and trust that the universe, when you vibrate with love and clarity, responds. If this story touched you in any way, if it made you reflect or rekindled hope, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications and share it with someone who also needs to hear this. Because sometimes, all that's missing is a spark to rekindle a fire that's always been there inside you.